So yeah, when you first fire up Blender, you'll just get this splash screen. Just click anywhere on the screen, get rid of that splash screen, and you're presented with the cube, a camera, and a light. That's in a collection here. When you can hide that. Yeah, but let's start from scratch really. You got the top menu there. Pretty self-explanatory to be honest. You know, create a new file, open stuff, open a recent file. You got recovery. It saves it to a location basically. If you get a crash, you can recover stuff. Obviously save as. Append, that's when you could join another file to your current file. You could append like a certain object or rig or something. Importing, that's like for an FBX. You'll use that a lot in games if you want to import an FBX, for example. Export an FBX to a game engine. But yeah, that's file. This is the top menu I mentioned. Edit, undo, trusty old Control Z. Rendering, that's when you want to render like that's your timeline down there. So you might want to render, you know, frame 1 to 250. You just render the animation. That's to render a single frame. Window, you can create another window of the 3D viewport, for example. Help, takes you to like the Blender documents, that does. But that's like your 5 basic things for saving, rendering and stuff. Then you've got different layouts here then. I mean, I work in layout mode a lot, or animation. Layout, that's what it looks like. You've got your timeline at the bottom, and your main 3D viewport at the top. Modelling, same sort of thing, but obviously it's just a full 3D viewport, nothing at the bottom here. And you'll use that. We'll go into this later, but that's used basically for when you're modelling stuff. But you can do all this stuff in layout anyway. But sculpting takes you to another workspace. And you've got different brushes here, such as, you know, draw, clay strips, inflate, flatten, grab, smooth. So that's your sculpt mode. UV editing. That's for unwrapping, that is. You create seams and you unwrap the object. Gives you like your UV 2D flat space on the left, 3D viewport on the right. Texture paint, pretty similar to UV edit really, where you can paint onto your object. Shading, that's for setting up materials, shading is. So you can create like Shift A for example, texture and image texture, then you'll plug that into your base colour. And you've got your roughness and metallic. We're going to go more in depth into all this. I'm just giving you an introduction now to it. Animation. That's pretty much, you got your perspective there. Your camera view, for example, there. And your timeline at the bottom. I use that a lot in my job, really, animation. Rendering. That's similar to this, where you can render an image and you've got your different settings on the right. Compositing, similar to rendering, I guess, for stitching images together. Geometry nodes, creates like an array of different objects. I don't really use that too much myself. Scripting, it's like Python and Mel for creating scripts and stuff. But yeah, that's the top menu. So I've created a PDF as well for this, a downloadable PDF. I'm just referring to that on the right. So that will give you, you can print an hard copy of that. The link will be in the description for the download. So yeah, make sure you download that. Some good information in it. It's a 20-page PDF document. So we'll go more now into the menus, panels and editors. So let me just this epic pen here. So for example, this panel here is now, oops, I've got my epic pen open here. This panel here is known as the outliner. And you can hide. See that cube that's created when you first fire up Blender. You can hide that cube. You've also got a light and a camera. There's your light, there's your camera. You can hide that collection, or you can simply just select it or delete it. If you hide it, yeah, you've got filters here, which only shows like collections, objects. Let's just keep that collection open for now. Cube. If you press F2, you can rename that. It comes in really useful. You don't want to like a scene full of silly name stuff like cube 1, cube 2, sphere 1, sphere 2 and that. You want to rename stuff. So you can either double click or F2, you can rename that. So yeah, this is a mesh. This is known as a mesh. This is, or an object. You just scroll through this PDF. Yep. So there's your cube. That's your outliner. This panel here. This is known as your properties. This is very important panel, properties. Contains information about this cube. You can move stuff there. For example, you can move the cube location, rotate it. If you hit N, it also brings up your transform sidebar there. By hitting N, you can move stuff there as well. Relations, we'll go a bit more into that in a while, but yeah, that's your properties panel there. Collections, instance, invisibility, for example. You might not want it to be visible in a render. You can key stuff. Most stuff in Blender is keyable. If you click that, you've created a key for it then, an animation key. It could be visible up to 10 frames, for example, and then from 10 to 20, invisible, then visible again. Again, viewport, display colours, various properties. I'm going to go more a bit in depth into this properties panel in a while. In any of the viewports, for example, in any of the panels, should I say, this top left here, you can click that and it will take you into different panels basically. So even though you've got these workspaces up here, you can also switch to them. So yeah, any of them. Pretty cool really. Working fast. So yeah, top left. Switch to any other workspace or panel. So yeah, just going back to that animation one. This is pretty important, this. Especially if you're working in short films and you want to see the camera view. You can manipulate. You just see the. I like to see the wireframe on an object. I do. You can do that here. Like that gets rid of all the grid lines and things. If you click wireframe, you can see the faces on your object there. So yeah, that's your main 3D perspective view. But that could be your camera in a film, for example. Like you could have a fixed camera. Or even though you want the 3D object to work in 3D space, your main important thing is going to be your camera here. You can manipulate things on the right. Press N for this panel here. Then you see it change on the left in your camera view. And that's your timeline where you key stuff. We'll go more into that in the animation part. But just as a quick example, if you select that cube and hit I, you've created a frame there. If you hit I at 40, and you rotate this, and it moves like that. Let's delete them frames now. Put it back to 0. That's known as auto key, that is. If you're animating, it's generally best to keep that auto key on. If you're modelling, shading, UV editing and stuff, moving stuff around and you don't want it animated, turn that off. Because there's been plenty of times when I've been moving cameras around that I didn't really want to animate, and I've had auto key on. So I've had to delete the keys in this timeline. So make sure if you don't want stuff animated, turn auto key off. If you want it animated, turn it on. In general. Let me just check where I got on my PDF. Right, navigating 3D space. This is obviously one of the most important things. Let's just set that back to 0 there. I'll get the screencast for the next video so you can see my keys I'm pressing. Not that important in this first intro. But I'll get the screencast key thing on for modelling and sculpting and stuff. Right. Sweat me whistle. Oh, where are you? Navigating 3D space. So, on the left there, ignore this by the way, this is just this isn't part of Blender, this is just known as Epic Pen, where you can just highlight stuff. This is just a little software thing known as Epic Pen. As I say, you can just highlight stuff. So yeah, this there, if you click T, hide it and unhide it, and that's for actually manipulating your 3D objects. That is, you've got your move tool, you can move it in Z, Y and X. But remember, I haven't gone into this yet, this is the most important thing. Rotating, zooming and panning. So I use a Cintiq, a graphics tablet, and that's what you really want to use for Blender. You can use your mouse if you want to do any sculpting and modelling. Really, it's best to use a Cintiq or a graphics tablet, Wacom. So to rotate around like that, rotate, it's just the middle mouse. So middle mouse button, and you're rotating your object around there. Middle mouse and control will zoom in and out. Let's hide that camera, hide the camera and light. So middle mouse, rotate. Middle mouse and pressing control, zoom in and out. Middle mouse and shift, pans. And what you want to do is, if you've got a graphics tablet in your Wacom properties, I put this in a PDF. There's your pen, For example, your Wacom pen. And you've got a button here. You want to set this button here to middle mouse. That's the best way to work. You're using a pen then and your middle mouse. Control Shift. So set that button on your Wacom pen to middle mouse. As I say, you can use a mouse. I still do sometimes when setting drivers up and things, but for the most part, I'll use my Wacom pen. So yeah, back to this panel. So select your object, then you can rotate. Then there, you're rotating the object. And you can rotate it 3D instead of you can stick to the one axis Y, X, or Z. Or you can use the manipulator there, gimbal, all axis. That's your scale. Yeah, that is. Again, one axis or a uniform scale for all of them. That combines all three of the above. This, similar to your Epic pen, this you can actually draw on the screen, annotate. So that's useful. This measures stuff, measures the size. Scale's important, especially when you're lighting stuff. And that last one, I think you can just add a cube. Obsessed with cubes, Blender. That you can set everything back to 0 there. Or another shortcut for that is Control A, all transforms. So if you've moved something, rotated, you want to keep that position. Control A, all transforms. Let's just Control Z. That's an important one. You'll use that a lot in Blender. Control Z, which is undo. This here takes you to an orthographic view. Clicking these, you can use them camera tools like pan, zoom, and stuff. Here, that locks viewport. But in general, it's best just to use the Control Shift and middle mouse. But yeah, I mean, you can use that. More effective with the mouse, I think, really. Using these here. Yeah, that's your main toolbar for 3D manipulation, 3D space. What have we got next then? Yeah, there's a lot of important keyboard shortcuts in Blender. It's really good to utilise them. As I say, I've shown you a few already. T. Bring up your toolbar there, N, side. And as I've shown you with this manipulation here, you can actually press G and move your mouse or pen. G for grab, and that moves it. R, rotate. S, scale. So instead of selecting one of these, as I say, you can actually just press G, move your pen or mouse, and that will move the object for you. So I told you, Control Z, very important. You'll use that a lot. Generally, I mean, there's your grid in Blender. So the cube starts kind of halfway above and below the grid. So if you move that up 2 meters, for example, in Z, and then Control A, all transforms, you'll get a nice clean thing, nice clean object. And it's above the grid instead of below it. So I generally like to do that as well. It's nice and flat, nice flat plane. Some other keyboard shortcuts. you've got X, that will delete the object. Control Z to undo. You might want a duplicate this cube, create another one by Shift D. Shift D, that will duplicate the cube. And then you can Shift D and Z, that will duplicate it, but only keep it in the Z axis, for example. You might want to zoom in to a certain object. So on your numpad, you click delete or the dot. That will zoom you in, that will, for the object you've selected. And that's on your numpad, delete on your numpad. Let's get the wireframe so we can see the edges. That creates a keyframe. You see how that's created keys now, the key. That's created an animation key now by pressing I. Means insert, I does. Just undo that for now. Always get in the habit of I'd probably do it every 2 to 3 minutes. Control S. Yeah, Control S. That saves the scene. Just save it as part 1. And now you've saved it for the first time. When you click Control S again, it'll just automatically save it the same place. So Control S and Control Z, very important. If you've created an animation key of any kind, if you press spacebar, you see the timeline now moving. That'll just play the animation, the spacebar will. Hitting that will take you back to frame 1. You see that extends it. You can extend it to however much you want. I mean, say for example you're creating a walk cycle, you generally have it on 25 or 24 frames. So starts at 1, ends at 24. So that's your length of your animation there. Another important one, tab. That takes you into edit mode, that does. We're going to cover that more in the 3D modelling, but you go into edit mode, you can select vertices, for example, and move them around. Another important one, A, means all. You've selected all there. And even though they're hidden, camera and the light, you've got them selected as well. So yeah, A, all. And like I said earlier in the video, you want to rename your stuff here and really get messy, believe me, when you've got hundreds of objects in a scene, sometimes thousands. You've got Cubo 1, Cubo 2, Sphere. It's no good. Name them to something meaningful. And do it straight away as well, I'd say. Because if you forget, you'll get lazy and you won't. Remember, that hides the collection. So these are stored in a collection. These are this light, camera, cubes. You could name that collection. Just call it, I don't know, part 1 for example. Back on, so yeah, back onto keyboard shortcuts, wasn't we? You could select this cube, and then the last cube. And if you hit P, Control P, you've now parented this cube and this cube to that cube. So when you move this cube, those cubes will move with it. Because you've parented. And that's Control P. The reason I said P is because that's another important one. It means separate. P does. So you could go into edit mode, select all the faces, hit P, selection. That's still parented. But P, for example, selection. So you've separated the one face from that cube. So that becomes a separate object there. So you could name that, I don't know, sorry. Face 1. So yeah, I just wanted to demonstrate the use of P, really. I mean separate part. You might want to unparent it. Alt P. Clear and keep the transformation so they stay in place. So when you move that now, these two are no longer, this child and this child is no longer parented. So yeah, Control P and Alt P. Important in 3D. Oh, I'm rhyming there. What else we got? Yeah, as I say, F2. You can double click here and rename, or you can click here and rename. F is to change the brush size, but that's more in sculpt mode. If you F, move your mouse, or in my case, graphics tab, pen, left and right, you're changing the brush size. Yeah. So yeah, F's an important one. You might want to isolate the selection as well on something where you might have a load of objects. You only want to see one. / that'll just isolate the one item there. If you hit / again, you'll be able to see all your items. Another important one is Shift S. If you hit Shift S, you can move the cursor. So your cursor is this here. I should have gone through that in the tools, but that's your cursor. That is. If you touch that, you can move this cursor. See that? 3D cursor there. You can move that to anywhere in the 3D world. So remember middle mouse to move around. Control middle mouse, zoom in and out. Shift middle mouse to pan. So yeah, this 3D cursor. Click that, move it around. But you might want this cursor to go to a specific place. Or you might want the cursor to go to this cube here. If you Shift S, cursor to selected, you'll move the cursor. Or you might want, for example, if you go into edit mode, select a vertex. I know this is a bit forward to what we're going on, but if you click Shift S there, move your cursor to selected. Cursor's there now. That's you'll use that a lot, Shift S. Really is important. Shift S. Cursor to selected. Then you might have one where you want the cursor there. Select this object. Shift S. Selection to cursor. So if you selected your cube, Shift S. You've moved that cube now to the cursor, for example. So yeah, we use that quite a bit. We separated these, didn't we? If you select that and then that, Control J You've now joined it back. Control J. We'll go more into that, into the modelling. No, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there, but I'm just welding the vertices here by pressing M. But we ain't got to worry about that for now. What else we got? Control A. That's the way of like clearing. You see this has got values here. There's values on that cube, isn't there? Location. You select that and press Control A. It'll bring up the apply menu. Or if you click all transforms, you've set them back to 0 there. You've also, your pivot point has moved. That's another important concept in 3D, the pivot points. So yeah, that cube's moving, but the pivot's there. What you can do is select the cube, object, set origin. Origin to geometry. It takes your pivot point back to there, now on the cube. It's got values, hasn't it? You want them to be 0, Control A, all transforms to deltas. Absolutely love that in Blender. You got a nice clean location, rotation and scale. Nice pivot point, and it's at 0. Let's move on to another really important thing in Blender, that's the properties panel. So let's go back to let's just Alt P, clear P. Let's select that, select that, select that. Control P, parent. So again, child, parent. Now, if you go to this properties panel, select that cube, for example, you'll see now that that the parent of that. So that's cube 1. There, cube 1. There's cube 1. You select that, you'll see its parent, cube 1. So when you do things in this 3D viewport, things will change in this properties panel. Rub that out. So you've got a lot of different settings in this properties panel. For example, this first one is just settings for the current tool or anything you've got selected. This next one, render properties. So I work with cycles a lot. You've got different render engines. So render settings, basically how many samples you want to sample in the viewport when rendering. Basically it's all to do with quality, denoising things. Settings for exposure. Performance, all to do with render. Output, basically your screen size, that is. You might want 1280p, 720 for example. You might just want to keep it at HD, 4K, 6K. Generally film is in 24 frames a second. So you have different frame rates, so I'll keep it at 24, I'm working. That again is your frame range. How you want to output it. Output it as a video, these are PNGs. So yeah, that's again to do with the output. Layers. Ain't got to go into that now. But that's your scene. World properties. You might want, for example, HDRI as a background. Different shaders. That's your world properties. I've shown you that one. Has to do with relations. Something's a parent of another. Visibility. Set the visibility in the viewport on or off. Add some motion blur to it. Motion paths. We're going to go more into this, but I'm just showing you as an intro. This is very important. This is your modifiers. So for example, you could generate subdivision surface for this cube. By doing that, you've added subdivisions, you've added more vertices and more faces. That's the subdivision surface now. You can manipulate it, create a head or whatever you need to add. You can have add more geometry to it. Unapply that. You could what other stuff could you have here? There's loads of stuff. Data transfer, that's to do with transferring weights. You use it from one character for another. For example, we're going to go into all this, but another one you could have is an array where you've added an array of cubes. So from just that one cube, you've now generated. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's the count, 7. You add more or less. That's the offset. Yeah, that's the array modifier. So yeah, all different modifiers here. Bevel, for example, that's going to bevel your edges. Yeah, the edges have beveled there now. You've beveled the edges of the cube. Generate's pretty much one you'll use a lot. Deform, you can add an armature, which is like a rig. We'll go into that more. Warp, wave, we're going to go into this more, but yeah. Cloth simulation. But yeah, very important. That is your modifier panel. Basically to modify 3D object. That's yeah, that's particles, that is, like snow, things like that, air. Physics again, to do with cloth. Constraints. You can have like different, you could copy the location of some of other objects. So for example, if you want that cube to copy the location of that cube, you can add different constraints here. Child of, which is like the parenting thing. As I say, we're going to go into this more, but you've got different constraints you can add. This one's the data. You got vertex groups to do with the bones again. Shape keys. We'll go into that more, but it's to do with morphing really between. Similar to if you go into edit mode, you could add a shape key where it changes the shape of it. We'll go more into that in editing and rigging. This one here is material. So you can change the colour of this cube. For a boring grey cube, is now a nice green cube. And that's the darkness and lightness of it. But remember, you won't be able to see the colours unless you're in either lit or material. You see it? Viewport shading, or shading with all your light. So we'll just go over that briefly in a minute. So yeah, that's your materials. Roughness is to do with how shiny something looks. So it's nice and shiny now. And this last one's texture, just different textures or brush textures. Again, we'll go into that with materials. Yeah, that's the main properties panel. As I say, you can go to different ones simply by top left. But I like to keep things pretty much default in Blender. I really like the layout as it is. This bottom panel's your timeline here, as I say, for animation. So let's just look at this viewport panel menus as well. You've got a lot of things for different camera settings. So the camera will zoom in the object there. You simply just middle and control or come out of it. Yeah, just different settings to do with the viewport or the object. And select all by mesh. And you've selected all your meshes, for example. Add a mesh. Let's add a sphere. Press there now. We've added a sphere. Add mesh. Add mesh. Cylinder. We've also added a cylinder. So yeah, you'll add a lot of objects like that as well. I like to have that cursor. Remember Shift S, cursor to world origin. Get it out of the way. Yeah, Shift S, cursor to selected. I'm just going over what we mentioned earlier to concrete it into here, like the Shift S, cursor to world origin. Yeah, that's how you add different objects. You can add a camera, add an empty, that's used in rigging and parenting and stuff. Object. Important one object is you can have different manipulations to it. Rotate, set the origin, mirror it, snap, all sorts of stuff here, delete it. X, delete, Control Z to undo. This here is a way of you've got different rotation points, like world, local. Local's the main one to use when you're rigging characters. So global, pretty much the same as local. The basic objects like that. You can see how it changes a little bit, cursor, depending on the world space. Again, that's to do with pivot points and manipulation. That's snapping, that is. So you might want to snap to a vertex, so when you move it, it'll snap to. You notice it's snapping. Snapping to a vertex there. You might want to snap it to a face, for example. So yeah, snapping. Proportional editing. We'll get more into that into modelling, but proportional editing is you can move things proportionally instead of just one single vertex, and you can change your size to it'll move all of the vertices. And proportional editing, that is quite useful at times, especially when you're modelling stuff. Proportional editing. This stuff here, selection and visibility. So if you turn that off, it'll hide all your meshes. That's if you don't want to see the 3D cursor. Don't generally use that much. Usually like to see the cursor of stuff. Statistics. That's important. It'll tell you basically how many faces this cube's got. 6. But there's 530 in all for all of them. So if I select all of them, all 530, 530 faces, there's only 6 per cube. Yeah, that's statistics. Statistics, that is. As I say, wireframe shows you all the faces if you're in wireframe. See through, you might want to see through something to select it. You might want to select this vertex here, for example, and not spin around if you're being lazy. You could go into edit mode, see through then, select it. I think here you can do it as here as well, X-ray. If you select this drop down arrow here, go into different materials as well. Set different materials for your objects and meshes. I like to go into matte cap sometimes if I'm sculpting. I like to use this second one as well. It's a bit more different variation of the lights. Yeah, you can go random as well. And that'll give you different colours for all your meshes. Quite good when you're looking into clipping issues and stuff in games. So. And you're testing stuff. So if things are clipping. If you've got all one colour, sometimes hard to see. But if you go random, you've got different colours. You can see stuff clipping through. Different geometry. So as I say, you could select that sphere, select that, Control P, keep the transform so it keeps it in place. Now that sphere is also parented to cube, so when you move that cube, they all move. If you wanted to unparent it, Alt and P, clear, keep transform. Now when you move that, it's no longer these are no longer trials of that. So yeah, this is just a simple introduction really to Blender. As I say, we're going to go more in depth on all this. But I think that's pretty much that's a decent intro really to the software. Most important parts, as I say, middle mouse to rotate, middle mouse control zoom in and out, middle mouse shift to pan. These are your different manipulators. Move your object around. That's your top panel. Panels here. A lot of it's self-explanatory on these panels here. Different transforms, snapping, proportional editing. Has to do with statistics and rendering. Outliner. You can keep track of your objects. Properties panel, important. timeline, important for animations. There's your toolbar. T, hide and unhide. N, hide and unhide this one. That's to do with view and your focal length, camera settings. Also, you got a light here. You got light properties, different power. You might want it as an area light. Change the power of it. We'll go more into that in rendering. We'll just conclude with like some basic terminology for some of the things in 3D. I mean, that's known as a mesh, that is. Cube, sphere, plane. Known as meshes or objects. Also known as geometry. A modifier here is something you'll add to a mesh to add a different level of complexity to it. A null, that could be, you could like add an empty, it should be a circle. See that circle we've added there, that's known as a null, really. You might want that to null to move this cube. You could select the cube, select that, Control P. And then when you move this circle, your cube moves. It's known as a null, that is. CGI, computer generated image. Poly count. I think we went into that with the statistics, didn't we? The poly count of this sphere is 512. UI, user interface. It's also known as a gizmo, that transform gizmo. That one does all three. Remember, you got G, R, and S for move, rotation, and scale on the keyboard. So yeah, I think that'll do for the intro, really. Hopefully that's explained a few things to you about Blender and 3D, and make sure you download that PDF as well. So a lot of what I've said is detailed in there. Good to print off an hard copy for that. You got it in front of you, refer to. But yeah, that's a complete introduction to the UI. That is. Part 2 is going to be modelling. So cheers guys, hope you enjoyed that. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.